Hello, everybody. This is a special day, and it is my great privilege to be here coordinating this closing session of our World Heritage. Um, um, uh, this seminar has been focused on disasters and pandemics and their connection with World Heritage sites. I am Fernando Pérez Oyarson and speaking from Chile and representing the Cultural Heritage Center of the Catholic University and the National Museum of Fine Arts. Be my first words to congratulate and to thank all the participants in this amazing seminar. It was so impressive and sometimes so moving to share day by day during the months of May with people coming from the 5 continents, letting us learn about their heritage cases, their problems, and their experiences. Very many thanks to all of them for making this possible. A few figures can give us an idea of the ambition, and I would dare to say the success of the seminar. There were 20 sessions with more than 40 online hours, 115 presenters from the 43 countries, and almost 450 participants in the Zoom sessions and more than 1,200 on the YouTube. Congratulations to the organizers, the Cultural Heritage Center, Humberto and the whole team, Yolanda, Karen, Hilter, and all those behind the organization. We hope that this has been a real contribution to our World Heritage Initiative, which seeks to promote a serious reflection about 1972 World Heritage Convention that next year is on its 50th anniversary. Let me say that perhaps we have naturalized so much the idea of heritage, and specifically of World Heritage, we're used to that, that sometimes we don't fully understand its complexity and its connections to social life. What we currently consider heritage was historically restricted to a much smaller set of objects, let's say, as well as very much attached to the idea of national identity. We all know how this universe has enormously expanded, including all kinds of goods and overcoming all kinds of borders. Listing aside as a World Heritage highlights its, let's say, international value. That means, to some extent, that these sites begins to belong to the international community in a way. I'm not sure if the 1972 convention was really aware about this revolutionary fact. After a nomination, what we used to consider, let's say, my place becomes simultaneously the place of others, with intervention of the national governments, international organizations, who obviously have a word to say about them. In this context, how do the conservation and protection, which was the original purpose, can be effectively accomplished? What does this nomination mean for the local communities? This relationship of World Heritage sites with local communities seems to be critical in connections with disasters and pandemics, which is a specific focus and subject matter examined in the seminar, which today comes to an end. How do communities experience living in a nominated site when things turn problematic because of a fire, a flood, an earthquake, or pandemics, as we have experienced recently? Do these conditions help or complicate them? In which ways? How can a variety of goods, their values and attributes, be preserved or even recovered under problematic conditions? Past doesn't survive in present under the form of memory, but under that of reality, said once the Spanish philosopher Javier Zubiri. This original idea let us reflect about the multiple and complex connections of communities and World Heritage sites. To whom are those sites meaningful? How do they perform as encounter fields for local and foreigners? To what extent and under which forms and conditions can be they profitable, let's say, for them, for those communities? These and other questions emerged behind the abasing set of cases and problems presented in each one of the seminar sessions. And today, we have a wonderful opportunity to reflect about them. For this purpose, we have invited a particularly qualified panel that I'm sure will make a wonderful contribution to clarify some of these fascinating issues. Let me introduce them very briefly, because I'm sure that they are very well known to all of you. We have Francesco Bandarin. He's an Italian architect and planner. He has an amazing international experience in heritage matters, is worldwide renowned for these. It is probably difficult to find someone with a better knowledge of heritage, its cultural nature, and the variety of problems it had to confront around the world. He has been in charge of the World Heritage Center and held the position of Culture Deputy Director of UNESCO, among other significant public responsibilities in the area. We have also Mike Turner. He's an architect and urban designing, performing both as a practitioner and academic in Jerusalem. He has shared a UNESCO chair in urban design and conservation studies at the Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design. He has a great experience in World Heritage nominations, and together with Francesco, he has been in the origin of this World Heritage Initiative. We have the privilege to have also Christina Cameron, academic of the University of Montreal, writer, historian, and considered one of the great experts in heritage in her homeland, Canada, as well as worldwide. She has received significant distinctions for her lifetime dedication to the field, and has deeply involved in World Heritage UNESCO committee, which she chaired for a while. Mario Santana is a Venezuelan architect based in Canada. He's an academic of the Carleton University, and he has also taught internationally, making an interesting connection between engineering and heritage. He has been deeply involved with ICOMOS, being recently elected as Secretary General of this organization. He has become an expert on technology applied to heritage and specifically in the issue of risk and disasters. Maria Eugenia Sigüenza is an architect and heritage expert from Ecuador. She is currently an academic from Cuenca University and a recognized expert in the heritage matters such as cultural landscapes. She has been a wonderful link between our group and our World Heritage Initiative board. Umberto Bonomo, Italian architect based in Chile, is the current head of the Cultural Heritage Center at the Catholic University, where he teaches. He has been the main responsible for this seminar. As an academic and also as a practitioner, he has been involved with heritage matters since long, field in which he has a variety of interventions and publications. So we have a great privilege, you can see. So I would like to offer the word about some of the issues I have mentioned, and probably I will focus on specific issues, and probably we can begin with this issue of heritage and communities, this kind of connection of all heritage and communities, which was mentioned in the convention from the very beginning, but how has it evolved? How is it conceived? The issue of benefits. So I think that you have many ideas about that, Perhaps we can begin with Francesco, if possible.
Well, thank you, Fernando, and good afternoon, good morning to everybody. And I would like, before starting, I would like really to congratulate your group, because you've done a fabulous job in these months. 20 events, it's a lot. In fact, I have to confess, I could not follow all of them because it's really overwhelming. But clearly, you have been able to, somehow look at this very complex issue in very detailed and looking at case studies. And certainly, you have enriched very much the knowledge of this very critical relationship between heritage and disasters and pandemics, which it's something that we see all the time. Now, you're asking a very general question. Let me try to elaborate briefly, because I think we want to also hear the other colleagues. Some of them have much more experience than me in this area. One thing that we certainly know and we have noticed, and it's a little bit at the origin of our movement of the Our World Heritage, is the fact that the convention has remained a little bit behind in the relationship, in establishing a good, correct, vital relationship between heritage and communities. As you just said, it's true, the convention mentions the community, and it is clearly stated in the text, but in a way that is really, let's say, old-fashioned. It's a kind of a top-down approach. There is a convention done by, enlightened people, governments, and experts, and so on. And the community is the thing that benefits from the conservation. So it's essentially a receiver of a benefit, and I don't think it has moved very much beyond this thing, in spite of the efforts that we have deployed in the past decades. This issue has always been very present, because in the meantime, since 50 years, the world has changed. And what was in the 1960s or 70s, perhaps a community could be seen as a receiver of benefits, today is a protagonist of heritage conservation, and not only a protagonist, but a vital, essential partner to all sorts of governments, local, national, international, that really seriously want to pursue preservation of heritage, because it has been made very clear to everybody that there is no conservation without the participation of civil society and communities. You cannot simply conserve anything if there is no motivated community around the site that participates and and somehow understands and takes the heritage on board as part of its future. So the convention is pretty old-fashioned, both in the existing text and also in the text that came later on, because, as I said, we tried many times to improve, strengthen this connection. In the UNESCO United Nations language, this was called relation between heritage and sustainable development, heritage and communities. And remember, not more than 10 years ago, there was, during the 40th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, there was a statement, a resolution then in Kyoto, during the meeting that celebrated the 40th anniversary, in which this was put at the center. But again, you look at this text and, it remains a little bit, there is a kind of a resistance of the convention to somehow embrace this thing, which is very strange for those who, look at the world of conservation, because other conventions of UNESCO, for instance, the Intangible Heritage Convention, for instance, the 2005 Convention for the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expression, on the contrary, have put the role of communities and civil society and at the core, at the center of everything. So there is something that needs to be a little bit updated, so to say, and we hope that our movement will somehow stimulate, collaborate now to with the member states, with UNESCO, in improving this, developing this approach and improving this relationship, so that we can really say that the convention has reached the 21st century. So it, as I summarize, it's something. At the moment, it exists, but it's not fully satisfactory. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Now, when it comes to disaster and pandemic, you probably have already discussed it. There is no solution, but to have a full cooperation, a full interaction between the convention and the people. Because how can ever a World Heritage Site that has been struck by a disaster such, I don't know, Kathmandu, the earthquake, or Bam in Iran, or fires that have destroyed important heritage in Africa, or you name it. There's been a lot. How can this heritage be recovered and brought back to its life without the community? Impossible. Not to mention the pandemics. This is a new thing. Perhaps nobody could foresee that, and there is no mention, of course, in the convention or in any other document of the UN of this issue. But we have now all facing a very dramatic issue of recovery from this very, very heavy shock that the pandemics has brought in the issue in the area of conservation. Conservation of World Heritage Sites in general, heritage, has been hit by a trainload. The resources have disappeared, the personnel is not being active, and to recover from this real disaster, it will take a long time. I don't think there is still a clear idea of what needs to be done. By the way, this year there is an opportunity because, as you know, the G20, which meets in Italy, by the way, in the G20 is dealing with these issues. There is the first time that the G20 has put culture and heritage, under its observation. And at the end of July, during the committee, the World Heritage Committee, there will be a meeting, on this. How can the biggest 20 countries in the world refashion, reorganize their cultural policies so that heritage and culture, of course, become are recovered and perhaps become different, but essentially have a bigger role in the life of the community. I think it's a very important policy passage that we need to watch and perhaps support. I think we can continue this discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Francesco. I could say that this point that Francesco is mentioning, this evolution from groups of enlightened people and then to the social involvement of community is not significant only for World Heritage. Is a general movement, we would like to say, in connection with heritage in general terms. So even heritage has turned a kind of political issue, which wasn't really in the beginning. So I think it's a very central point. But I don't know, perhaps Cristina, you can add something on this point, perhaps in your own environment, how those things evolved.
Thank you, Umberto. And before starting, like Francesco, I'd like to congratulate Umberto, yourself, Karen, Hilter, and the entire team for an amazing month. Like as Francesco says, we couldn't manage to get to all of the 20 sessions. Some of them were in time zones that were not easy for us, but the ones that I saw were certainly terrific. And I really congratulate you all for digging deep into this subject. Now for the communities issue, I thought that Francesco gave a very good overview, and it made me recall that in the beginning, it's very curious that in addition to the language being quite minimal in the convention, I would say, related to communities, that communities really actually were not welcome. And my first meeting of World Heritage was 1987, so I have a long memory of what happened. And in those early years, we were asked actively as state party representatives not to tell communities that their proposals were going to be put to the World Heritage Committee. And the reason for that was we don't want people lobbying, and we don't want people being disappointed if their site does not get inscribed. Well, this actually goes totally against what Francesco has said, with which I agree, that you can't possibly conserve World Heritage sites without the active engagement of the local communities and civil society more generally. And I recall I chaired the meeting in 1990, and in 1991, there was a meeting of all the states parties of the United Kingdom. And I can't remember the number of sites that were on the list at that point. But I do remember that it was at the University of York, and all the site managers were invited. And this was a big breakthrough. This had never happened before. And most of them stood up and said, we didn't know we were World Heritage until we got invited to this meeting. So that really, for me, was just such a surprise that this was really seen as a government activity at a national level. And so that really, I think, sets up a tension between the national/international community and the local communities. And that is something that I realized then. And Canada, to its credit, always had more local participation and sign-on, but it was not perfect either. But if you look at the nomination documents going back to the early ones, there actually were sign-ons from the municipality, from the province, and from Indigenous First Nations when that was appropriate. Where I see a difference now is what is the definition of community, because at the beginning, community was seen as people who lived around a site. And I think the discussions at the NARA Plus 20 meeting in Japan was very interesting. Around one of the 5 areas that was really highlighted was the idea that communities were not necessarily local. As Francesco has said, the world has changed. And certainly we are a community today on this call, and we're from all over the world. And so communities can be defined differently now. And so whose community counts in a way, and whose values count in another way. The communities of interest are many, and they often land on the same place. And so then it's a challenge to bring together and reconcile all those different views and all those different approaches to conservation. So that is a big change. And so what I see is kind of a tension in a way between the communities and their interests and the national governments and their interests, presenting a narrative. For instance, in presenting sites to the World Heritage Committee, they often present sites that really represent nationally significant narratives and not necessarily capturing the local values. But then when you come to actually work on the sites and conserve the sites, you absolutely need the engagement of the local community. So that I see that as a tension, exacerbated a bit by the local needs. And I would say here, there is often a local requirement or demand for access to resources inside World Heritage sites. And there's been the conservation doctrines in general have been, no, that doesn't happen, and that shouldn't happen inside the site. And so there's a tension there. And in this regard, I'm very impressed with, I watched a program last week on the Grand Canyon in the United States, whereby the Grand Canyon, whose narrative had always been about geology, suddenly is now being in the engagement of 11 tribes, indigenous tribes around Grand Canyon, which is a World Heritage Site, nominated not for any of the values related to the indigenous peoples, but nominated for its geological significance. That site now has the active engagement of 11 indigenous tribes, all of whom are helping to round out the story of why this place is significant and sharing their crafts and their relationship to the site over millennia. So I do see a shift there, but I think in that regard, indigenous peoples are getting more access to places that are important to them. But I think more generally, there is often a tension, and certainly a tension between the World Heritage Committee, and who has, for example, a no mining policy in terms of World Heritage, and the local community that wants to have jobs and wants to have access to resources. So the tension between communities and the national/international communities, there are many reasons for that, but I do I believe, as Francesco says, we've shifted from a top-down, we have to shift from a top-down to a bottom-up approach to conservation, and that involves the communities and civil society. And that's why I've been interested in working on the creation of our World Heritage, because it really does encourage a more democratic participation in the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. You have raised many points. The idea of definition of community is, I think, is very critical, is very central. And also, I would say the idea of being disappointed. I think that's crucial, because you mentioned that, well, sometimes some people fear that people would be disappointed for not being inscribed, for not being listed. But I would say that sometimes they are disappointed after being nominated, because they see that nothing happens and they have more problems than solutions. And so I think we need to think about that. And this comes to the point that probably nomination alone doesn't guarantee protection. We need also other things. We need funds. We need knowledge, for instance, even technical knowledge. We need involvement of the community. So the set of this complex of elements probably tends to give some more guarantee of preserving those sites. So, well, but we can continue elaborating this. I think it's a fascinating field. And so how do you see that, Mike, from your point of view and in your geographical and cultural area?
Well, I think that also like to add my thanks and appreciation for an amazing month of activities. I'd just like to pick up on Christina's important point about looking at NARA. And the original part of the NARA document actually identified two responsibilities: the community that created the heritage, and then the second one is that the communities who are managing the heritage. If I was to look at the operational guidelines, currently the communities are, if I quote, there's international communities, there's local communities, there are NGOs, interested parties, general public, civil society, local people, present, future generations, cultural communities. All these are texts and words which are used very, very confusingly in the operational guidelines. I think that, in fact, looking at two critical groups of communities, especially when we're looking at disasters, are the people who are living there, those who are currently managing the site. And I think that this is where, in fact, they're the people who are taking the brunt of the issues. And therefore, at one of the discussions which we had earlier in the month, what we looked about is that when there is a disaster, there is a certain amount of friendships which come together about people trying to join each other and help. And I think that we have to then generate these ideas also at the time when there's no disasters. We have to then generate at the time when there's no disasters, the actual wherewithal and the format and the connections which bring us together. So when there is a disaster, then it automatically comes into its activities. So I think that it, as Christina said, in the NARA plus 20, there was an expansion about the understanding of community, which is the global, which are the virtual communities, the diasporic communities, which are also taking place. So suddenly we can then get greater support. The support might be knowledge, it might be moral support, it might be knowledge, support of knowledge and activities, which can actually bring people through the disaster. So I think that disasters are also opportunities, and we see them throughout history about how, in fact, communities have then looked in disasters, whether they're the Great Fire of London. Did they take the opportunity? Whether there were also then other earthquakes in Baldonotto, where in fact then after the earthquake, there were two options: to go back to the village in the late 17th century or build a new town with a new style called the Baroque. Well, they're now both World Heritage Sites. So in fact, then the opportunities which take place from disasters are very important, and they can only be made in conjunction with lots of people joining together and taking these ideas forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. Very interesting. I think we will come again on those elements you are adding to the conversation, and probably Mario, how could you relate your interest in technology and heritage to the issues we are discussing here?
Thank you, Fernando, for letting me speak. And before I start my answer, I would like to thank also the organizers, Fernando, Humberto, Karen Gold Cordova, and Hilder, and especially also Yolanda, that I know that she's been out. And also thank you for giving me the floor next to these, very relevant figures such as, Christina, Francesco, and Mike. I feel very honored to share this panel with them. Many people doesn't know, but Francesco was actually my boss a long time ago when I was in UNESCO. And Christina has been my mentor here in Canada since I moved, and Mike I have known for many years. So I feel very, very pleased. Now, I would like to take a different view because I consider myself an academic and also a person that works for nonprofit, basically because I am very active in ICOMOS. But I am a practitioner too, and I had the opportunity to work in many UNESCO projects. In particular, I would like to bring back Afghanistan. I had the opportunity to work in Bamiyan in 2002 and 2003 on a UNESCO project for the documentation of the destruction after what happened to the Buddhas. So at the time there, when we were doing the recording after the explosion, we were often in a very isolated country, a country that started from minus 20, let's say, that's how Afghans described it, a country that was completely devastated, not only for the conflicts, but also a very deep human crisis. And I remember that some archaeologists, foreign archaeologists, visited the site while I was recording. And I ran to their car because we didn't get many visitors at the time. And I was very excited, to see some other people from other countries. And they said that they were disgusted by the actions of UNESCO not, taking the communities away, living in the caves. And I had become very sensitive to the issue because while we were working, we could see the children, going to the little river, getting some water back to their families because their parents couldn't walk, right? And they were living in those conditions in the caves of Bamiyan. And I found deeply responsible to say that these people should be evacuated from the place, as I know that they were evacuated to tents by the government just to protect that image of the Bamiyan Buddhas as being something worth protecting for World Heritage. So on one hand, we see the protection of these heritage places that, by removing the community that is actually living there because of the conflict. And that gives me a profound disappointment of my job and my field. But on the other hand, I feel that, UNESCO and the World Heritage Convention has brought so many things that we can be proud of, because, combining the document on nature and culture, mobilizing people to be sensitive to the protection of heritage. And like any other instrument and like any other evolution in our society, I think that the convention needs to evolve and to of course, involve the local communities and the people that live there. And I think that actually our World Heritage Initiative is a good example of that, because we get to experience, as we have been doing this last month for about, I don't know how many hours, I think I saw 40 hours of discussion. Now, 40 hours of discussion brings also a lot of recommendations, and I'm hoping that equally as we develop we are developing our transformational technologies report for our World Heritage Initiative, that we also see a very strong report for what has come up from disasters and pandemics discussions, because I know there is a lot of material. I had the opportunity to see a lot of the events. I was waking earlier than Christina, so I was able to see them and and to listen. And I was able to, you know, exchange ideas with other experts. So I was really very happy to see all the information. Sometimes I didn't agree with some of the things that were said, and sometimes I agree totally. And I think that that's basically what we need to have in our World Heritage. We need to have those discussions that some people don't like to hear, and some people need to hear about. Now, so I think that that's kind of my reaction to what you said in the beginning about the role of communities and so on, and how the convention needs to evolve. Now, how would the convention evolve and how would this change happen? I'm not clearly there. I know that in ICOMOS there has been very much discussion. And I think in the World Heritage Committee also there has been a lot of discussion. And there is truly many people also that are involved in the convention itself that also feel the need to do it, and also in the advisory bodies at all. Many of us are convinced that change needs to happen. But what about the World Heritage Committee? Because that's the place where things seem to happen, right? And the decisions are made. And how UNESCO will also transform itself, because we see a lot of problems with the way that UNESCO reacts in the verge of conflicts, or in the verge of disasters and pandemics. And now also about pandemics, I mean, this pandemic, I believe that it was the product of humans, right? And humans experimenting with animals at different levels. And this has generated a big impact in all our lives, right? So I think that that's also important to understand. And one thing that struck me that I didn't know when I was talking to Christina some days ago is that Canada is not part of the Intangible Heritage Convention. And those are reasons because that has to be directly with the local communities and their claims of land. And that's an issue that we have in Canada. So and I'm proud of Canada, but I know there are many things that need to change. So also UNESCO is not UNESCO itself. UNESCO is a series of inter countries that belong to this organization and to the convention. So I think that we have to change also from the root of the countries. So we all have a responsibility as citizens of a particular country that our country makes the right decisions. So I think that that's also important to acknowledge, because I don't want to put all the blame on UNESCO and ask them to change while we don't change the countries that belong to that organization. So what you said about technology, I'm sorry for my long answer. I think that technology has a lot to offer to disasters and pandemics. I think that the convention hasn't capitalized on the use of technology. We saw that on our theme of transformational technologies and of information. And we see it daily on our Instagram feed or Twitter feed or Facebook tweet that we can get information about what is happening somewhere immediately. Is that information relevant or accurate? Of course, that's very questionable, right? But I think that in the sense of the role of social media, I think that that's something really important. Then we have satellites that can emit images from what is happening just now or yesterday, so we can have immediate information about it. We have satellites with sensors that can provide information about, LiDAR can provide information about how the grounds are looking. We have weather forecasts. We have many information that can actually allow us to see the impact of disasters. I don't know if you follow what happened last week in Congo, immediately after the explosion of the volcano. So I think that probably the World Heritage Convention has to upgrade their capacity in the use of technology and make better synergies with those groups that provide technology. I think that there is a big gap between the providers of information and the convention as one of the users of that information, and that needs to change also. And then in terms of technologies and how communities can work. In our transformational impacts, we had in the global competition, we had different entries. In particular, I would like to acknowledge the entry of the Planet Happiness, which is actually a kind of survey, very simple survey to understand the happiness of communities in the Everest region of Nepal. And I think that these are kind of interesting explorations. How can we use those type of tools to understand the impact of visitors in sites? And that goes also beyond other uses of technology. So I would like to conclude here. I have a lot more to say, but I want to give the floor to others. So thank you, Fernando, for your comments.
Thank you very much, Mario. We'll come back to some of those points a bit later. I think it's very important that the point you raised about the importance of the convention and the importance of the existence of, let's say, World Heritage is a kind of miracle in a way. And of course, it can improve a bit the international solidarity if we manage it properly, and perhaps moderate the national idea of heritage that was prevailing in the beginning. So I think it's a very important point. So before giving the floor to Maria Eugenia, I admit I'm a bit obsessed about the issue of knowledge, and of course technology means knowledge at the same time, and perhaps we can refer to different cases we were able to learn about in this seminar, and I kept thinking in one about Sudan. Is such a faraway country for me, for myself, for my experience, and there was I think a magnificent case presented about Sudan and its archaeological interest, and the role of the community there was being in the service, let's say, of foreign archaeologists. And we would say, what about if they had the proper knowledge about their heritage? That could change things enormously. And I think so. I think again that knowledge is crucial and can be crucial for this evolvement, let's say, of the idea of World Heritage and of course of the convention. So, but what about you, Maria Eugenia? And you have also experiences because you were able to attend some of the meetings, but also about your homeland.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to all the organizers for considering me to participate with this wonderful panel. I would have never imagined to be sharing such interesting thoughts and with people that I'm normally only used to reading books or citing articles. So I feel so honored to be here with all of you. I take also the opportunity to congratulate a team that has been hardly working for making possible the development of these 20 sessions. It's been quite, I can imagine the work, the amount of work that it requires, but also the satisfaction that you will have with all this information being shared and this interesting discussions being done. So from my own experience, I'd like also to recall one of the reflections that Mario raised about I will start with the point, the statement of disasters itself. I think from the reflections in this month, there was one about the statement itself, about what the disaster means. And they would say they are all because human interaction. In this sense, there are not really natural disasters, because those things that we consider as a disaster, normal evolution of natural things. So in this sense, what it causes, probably the disasters, is the impact that it causes on us. As for example, we know we do constructions and practices, maybe they are not prepared for the changing of the land itself. So what I would say from this point onward, probably we have two sides from disasters. And I will relate there with community, because we have two sides. I would say a negative side, which comes with the impacts that we normally have one of the most difficult would be when lives are lost, but we also have in a positive side what I would call resilience side. And in the resilience side is when the communities come or become, as Francesco already mentioned, the protagonists, because this is also becomes in the positive sides, it becomes opportunity where communities come together again. So from my experience, I would say there has been a lot of potential also during the disasters and during this pandemic that was never expected to happen. But there is a potential to show again a sense of solidarity, also the sense of co-creation and co-work that characterizes probably, and I'm recalling the background that I have, which is Latin America, South America in this sense. But we have a lot of pre-Hispanic practices that call all these values of solidarity, and it's because they work together. We, for example, have a pre-Hispanic between our indigenous population. They are called Minca, and it's just coming together to build a new or to rebuild in the sense of the impact of the disaster. So to rebuild some of them, what they consider is part of their heritage. It doesn't really matter if it's considered at the international level as world heritage. It's just something that they recognize themselves with some value, and they will come together to rebuild it again and to just give their work with the hope that they will use that for common needs. And so I would say that recalling again the community as protagonists, I have been present in so many scenarios where people is part of this resilience. I can talk, for example, about some cases in really close by in the city, my city town, which is Cuenca in Ecuador, where people, for example, that lost their during the earthquake in 2016, one of the solutions that came with at the beginning was not only to be on site itself, but for example, taking advantage of this new knowledge that was also one of the main points that Mario and Fernando were mentioning, knowledge and preparedness, I would say. And for example, coming together for mapping, and it doesn't really, you didn't really have to be there to be mapping all the things that have changed or all the properties that had an impact because of the disaster itself. So there are different levels, I would say, to be ready, and we can come together from the really community sense, working inside, but there are also ways to involve, for example, the knowledge and include the knowledge of new generations that could create new maps or working in platforms where they are sharing information. So I could say in the sense that the communities itself, they have different roles, and somehow we are now called to discover what are all those strengths from all the different groups of people in a community. And I would say that also from the new generations that are just joining this the initiative of our World Heritage, I think we are ready to put all that effort to make probably to trace different ways to make the community really active in this sense. So thank you very much for this interesting talk.
Thank you, Maria Eugenia. And I only would like to say that it's important that you be here, because the initiative had put special care on the fact that different generations should participate on this. So I think it's completely coherent with the general ideas and general policies of the initiative. And perhaps to finish with this first turn, I would like to ask Humberto perhaps to make references to different examples that emerged during the month of May seminar in connection with this issue of communities and heritage. Humberto, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando. I will, to be precise with the language, I will speak in Spanish. You can activate the simultaneous translation in the bottom bar. Sí, quiero también agradecer la posibilidad de compartir estas ideas con todos ustedes en este panel de cierre y partir por esta nueva comunidad. Ya Cristina lo mencionó, nosotros reunidos aquí es una nueva comunidad. Nosotros lo que hemos logrado hacer en este mes ha sido gracias a todas las redes de contactos y personas que entre nosotros hemos compartido y eso, digamos, es una nueva manera de enfrentar estos temas a escala mundial. Entonces, eso creo que recalcar eso como una comunidad nueva me parece fundamental. Lo que hemos podido ver a lo largo de este mes es que si por un lado es cierto que UNESCO celebra el patrimonio mundial y también hemos podido ver cómo a veces este patrimonio mundial tan celebrado y protegido por UNESCO está desconectado de las personas, de las comunidades que lo habitan. Hemos podido ver que hay un mínimo común denominador entre ese patrimonio y esas comunidades, que es la exposición de ambos a la vulnerabilidad, el riesgo, la destrucción, la muerte. Desafortunadamente, a lo largo de estas 20 sesiones, hemos visto, digo desafortunadamente porque está registrado, hemos visto muchísima muerte, muchísima destrucción, muchísima pérdida de patrimonio, tanto natural como material, cultural, perdón, y de vidas de personas. Y eso, desde mi punto de vista, me ha permitido, digamos, sacar 3 conclusiones preliminares. Por un lado, UNESCO tiene un sistema muy riguroso y una institucionalidad muy precisas en las declaratorias, pero al mismo tiempo no tiene una institucionalidad potente en apoyar concretamente a las comunidades y el patrimonio cuando esto se ha visto afectado por desastres y pandemia. Por otro lado, hemos podido ver también que hay una gran soledad de las comunidades cuando se ven enfrentadas a problemas como terremotos, tsunami o la pandemia. Esa soledad de pequeñas comunidades, desde la chiquitanía en América Latina a pueblos en Japón, en África, que pierden sistemas económicos precarios, quizá muy basado a veces en el turismo, en la producción agrícolas locales que se venden en los mercados que ya no existen producto de la pandemia, una serie de problemáticas que demuestra cómo estas pequeñas comunidades que viven en estos lugares muy valiosos en términos patrimoniales están totalmente solas. Y al mismo tiempo hemos visto cómo, otra conclusión, cómo estos problemas de escala mundial como la pandemia, que esta guerra silenciosa que todo el mundo está viviendo desde hace 2 años casi, ha generado nuevas dinámicas de relación entre las personas que viven en los sitios de patrimonio mundial. Vimos un caso muy emblemático en Japón, donde, por ejemplo, los restaurantes y los sitios culturales se cerraron a los turistas para dar acceso solamente a los habitantes de las localidades. Entonces, esas relaciones son nuevas formas en las cuales las comunidades, distintos tipos de comunidades, como decía Cristina, se enfrentan, se relacionan y frente a las cuales hay que generar nuevos mecanismos y soluciones probablemente a escala global y no solamente local. Creo que esa la importancia de tener soluciones tanto a nivel local como global, será un desafío importante en el futuro. Eso por el momento, Fernando. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Humberto. And I think we can go to the more specific issue of the seminar. We talked a lot about communities. It's a crucial and central issue, but we had to focus on disasters and pandemics. And I would like to propose a couple of issues. You can combine them as you want, and if you want to interrupt, you can do it, please. I think that the issue of disasters, we have been very much aware about disasters and risks in the last decades, everywhere. It emerged, let's say, centers, even careers, curriculums centered on risks and disasters. We had even one of our university participating in the seminar. That was very interesting. Careers like engineering are very involved on that. So risks are, in the center of the international worries, let's say. But how does this worry relate to heritage? Do we need, let's say, a specific kind of culture about risks and disasters connected with heritage? Because sometimes we have been able to see that in our country that is very much connected with earthquakes, and sometimes the destruction of the national heritage comes from the reconstruction process and not from the disaster itself, and that means a specific culture. So some goods disappear during the reconstruction process, and even so, both technicians and communities are sometimes involved in that processes. Do we need to be more prepared for that? So this is, let's say, one issue, one question about disaster. I think it's very interesting what Mike was saying about the special social conditions that emerge in the case of disaster. This issue of solidarity and friendship and all that, I think, is very central. But the other issue is connected with pandemics. As Francesco said, we don't know very much about what will happen with pandemics. But if something is clear, that pandemics involved the slowdown of mobility and even the stop of mobility. And this has been very surprisingly crucial for heritage. So can we imagine a scenario in which mobility and even tourism is not so central to the preservation of heritage, and this is more connected with other issues, even economic issues, daily life and other things, knowledge. So because I know there is a specific group thinking about tourism, but this emerged very much during the seminar. So I would like to offer you the possibility to reflect a bit on this issue of risk and a specific risk, and then let's say alternative to tourism as a supporting force of heritage. Can you elaborate a bit about that, Mike, please?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, it was, I think the most important thing which we're dealing with is the importance of diversity. And I would like to add another part of diversity and also the theory of redundancy. This, in fact, creates resilience. Resilience is something, if I think about, I like to give the example, I've got 2 kidneys. I could do with one, but nature is very good. It gives us more than what we really need. And we have sort of like reserve spaces. Diversity is very important because then it gives us then a wider understanding as opposed to everything being tourism or everything being just cultural heritage. Mm-hmm. If we put heritage in the life of the community, it must be all encompassing. It must then encompass the whole activities of putting it in the function of the life of the community, as the Article 5 of the Convention says. So I think that we are actually looking at the importance of looking at risks and looking at risk in its wider context. I think that we're going to be looking at, it's going to be highlighted with the implication not just simply of climate change, but climate extremes. Climate change might take a little bit longer to actually, the level of the seas might take a little bit of time, but we're getting climate extremes immediately. We're getting floodings which are taking place. We're getting landslides which are taking place because of that. So we have to then manage these extremes in a way which then looks at risks. And when we look at risks, we should then look at the state of conservation reporting. There are, in fact, Christina will recall that after the state of conservation, when she chaired the session in Quebec, there was an importance to start looking at the trends which were happening. And this was a major turning point. I think that it hasn't been yet really understood exactly the importance of now having this information as trends and taking place over time. So we began to then integrate what the risks are. So risks of archaeological deterioration or of urban development and other aspects which are all part and parcel of an environmental or impact assessment needs to be then integrated. Immediately if we say, okay, it's a disaster, the mayor will say, it shouldn't happen on my watch. Okay, wait a minute. I think that we need to be a little bit more involved. And when we say, well, if in fact what you're doing is not just good for the disaster of natural disaster, but it's also good for other disasters or other issues which are taking place for heritage, we're likely to get better mileage. So I think that if I'm looking also the importance of redundancy, that is diversity. Redundancy is really relates what I would really look at integrity. Integrity is how much do I need to express the value? I need a little bit more than just simply the technical minimum. I need more, I need so much oxygen to live, but I need just a little bit more. I need a little bit more space. And I think that this is the importance of how we build in redundancy into our activities. In other words, we've got particular sites. They can be a little bit bigger than they really need to be. They need to take on the communities and a little bit more than just simply the community which is involved. So I would really also think that the most important thing which I'd like to end with is then, which I've called the culture of resilience and the resilience of culture. In other words, it is a different relationships about how we react in Latin America to the earthquakes or to the tsunamis in Japan. In other words, the characteristics of the communities are so important. Umberto, you spoke about then the local communities. On Friday, there was such a humbling discussion, which I know that Mario also participated in that discussion, of the local communities in Chile and Bolivia. It was really humbling about how they reacted and how they sort of dealt with these issues. So I think that therefore there's a culture of resilience, and the other one is the resilience of culture itself. And these are the cultural assets, not just simply that which is inscribed, but everything around it, as Fernando actually in his opening spoke about. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mike, for this illuminating theoretical contribution. I think it's very inspiring, because sometimes we are obsessed about how to protect heritage. And sometimes we forget that heritage can protect us. So it's a kind of double meaning. And I think we need to treat all these issues in new ways and trying not only to legally protect, but also to socially inspire what heritage means. So you have great experience, Christina, on that. Can you say a little words about that?
Thank you, Fernando. Speaking generally about preparedness, I'll something on my screen. Okay. I would leave the specifics of risk preparedness to Mario in terms of all of the upstream preparedness, so that when disaster hits, you're not starting with a blank slate. And I have to say that I've always been impressed by the training of Japanese firefighters. There's something on the line here, doesn't matter. Japanese firefighters that are trained to go and look after the temples, the wooden temples, and they have a training every year. And the site up in the mountains, they have a community plan, and every community has one faucet that they're responsible for in terms of if ever there is a fire. That's the thatched roof community up north of Toyama. That's it. But it's interesting that I agree on the risk threat of over tourism, and that we don't need to talk about that here. But I do think climate change, in addition to pandemics, climate change, as Mike says, is facing us very clearly. We have all the predictions facing us. We know what's going to happen, and we are going to have, I guess, migrants from places that are flooded over, and we're going to have sites that collapse and so on. And that doesn't seem to have woven in as strongly in the global preparedness structure as it should. I think when you say, how can we deal with pandemics and disasters, and preparedness upstream is one issue, and how can we build back better, as they say, or how can we not have the response destructive of heritage? And I think here the doctrine, the sort of conservation doctrines that we are currently working with are not broad enough, and have not woven in more interdisciplinary thinking about social benefits, about behavior, and a lot of other areas that should be contributing to doctrine. We've inherited the Venice Charter, which we all know, and we've inherited a number of doctrines, but I do think that there's a rethink of doctrines to understand that it's not happening in isolation, and that communities are very important in that process. The other, and in fact, I think that that question about access to expertise was something that was discussed very strongly in the North and South American response to the NARA document, when there was a big conference, I think in Santa Fe, if I'm not mistaken, but there was a lot of discussion about communities and the need for communities and for the social benefits to be part of that process. One other element that I think is an issue related to how do we recover is the opportunity to access the multiple narratives around a site. And this has the structure of the World Heritage Convention. The structure of the convention is such that it requires countries and the committee to identify outstanding universal value, in other words, international values. But there are a lot of other values that are associated with sites that are not necessarily going to reach that threshold, and the criteria that the committee uses, that are very important for developing a sense of belonging and a sense of this being part of people's day-to-day existence. And I think that the pandemic, in a way, with the reduction in mobility, has actually presented an opportunity to explore those multiple narratives a lot more. And the last point I'd make is that the pandemic has also, I don't know, I mean, people will think that Canada has a huge amount of natural heritage and open space. And of course, the World Heritage Convention includes natural heritage. But the fact is that that natural heritage has not been made very accessible to individuals, and everybody has now understood we need open public space in pandemics, because we need, that is one way where we can keep ourselves in touch with nature, which is very important, but also we can keep ourselves safe physically. And so in that sense, I come back to what you said, Fernando, and that is heritage can help protect us. And I do think that the one area of impact of the pandemic has been this heightened awareness of the need for public space. And that can be in local parks, of course, but it also is in all these vast areas that have been set aside under the World Heritage Convention, and somehow for local use can be made more available. So with that, I pass the baton back to you, Fernando.
Well, thanks very much. And thank you for reminding us, well, the importance of issues like climate change, and of course, its impact on natural heritage on the side, but also on cultural landscapes. We had wonderful examples during the seminar about cultural landscapes, and there are very often sort of delicate systems that we need to take care of and also thank you for reminding us, and perhaps Mario can tell us a bit about that, of interdisciplinary thinking. I know that perhaps heritage issues have been too much confined to certain disciplines, and they need to expand to other fields and to be understood from the legal side, from the economic side, of course, from the technological side. I think that those things are so inspiring and so important, and probably need to be considered in every evolvement of the convention, of even on the way of thinking these problems. So, Mario, you are a real expert on things like risks and disasters. So, what do you think about those things?
Well, I think it's really it's an interesting reflection. And when I was listening to Christina, when I moved to Canada 9 years ago, I was very struck about the amount of museums that collect historic buildings where people or communities actually move there. So there is a museum in Edmonton, in Alberta, which is a province in the west of Canada. And this is an Ukrainian village. And this Ukrainian village is basically a composition of historic buildings from the Ukrainian immigrants that went to Canada in the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century. And this started as preserving this Ukrainian heritage, and people started, moving buildings that they consider to be threatened. And then actually the museum has to refuse every single year more buildings, because there are still a lot of Ukrainian villages, Ukrainian heritage, and people want to donate these sites, and they can no longer have the capacity to conserve these buildings in this museum. So that brings me to that concept of the protection of the physicality, right? And so in the World Heritage Convention, we talk a lot about the attributes and the integrity of those attributes. We talk about authenticity, but I guess authenticity could be another topic for another symposia. And the physical integrity that we try to protect of these physical monuments is, I think, the basis of this risk preparedness theory. So we have seen in the past that actually the work of the International Scientific Committee of ICOMOS ECORP has been on providing guidelines on how to protect these physical assets with the involvement of the community, I have to say it lately. And this has been really, really, really good. Another aspect that I think that was really important of what Christina was mentioning, if the fact that, the climate crisis. And I was listening to a radio program in which they were interviewing a little girl of 15 years old that was writing to the Prime Minister of Canada to do something about mitigating the effects of climate change and the reduction of the CO2 emissions. And the person asked this little girl, why are you doing this? And she said, because when I am your age, I would not have the same work that you enjoyed. And that brings me to the point that we have seen in our World Heritage Initiative, is that most of our core engines that run these activities are people who are emerging professionals. So I see that as a very good sign of change, right? Because a new community of experts in heritage is becoming to the stage and maybe making better changes than the one I try to make, or other ones like Cristina, Mike, and Francesco were doing, or are doing very actively. So I think that that's an important point. Now about particularly the technical part of the technology and the risk preparedness, we had the opportunity to listen to many presentations throughout this month about technologies to document sites after destruction, to assess the impact. And I remember the lecture actually from one of my colleagues, Joe Calas from Beirut, and how they have been using drones to collect data immediately after the destruction because of the blast in Beirut. And then I remember the Okubo from Japan, who is a professor in risk preparedness, who was talking about the gamification of the response. So how to teach people using video games to react in case of a disaster. So I think that there are many good approaches in terms of technology. Also, I think that many of our speakers talked about the need of inventories. I think that we haven't mentioned that, because actually inventories is the basis of the World Heritage Convention. A World Heritage site which is nominated has to be included in a general inventory of the countries. And we see in many cases, this is not what happens. A country just makes a tentative list out of nowhere. And this tentative list then is gradually put on the World Heritage list. While we need a concise, accurate, and complete inventory of all the cultural resources of a country to be able then to decide what to put on the World Heritage list. Then another topic, I mean, I don't consider myself an expert in indigenous communities, but since moving to Canada, I have become very familiar with the problematic. And I think that in view of, the different opinions of the perception of heritage, I think that has been lacking a lot on the World Heritage. And I think that that's a point that we have addressed throughout all the entire themes that we have in this initiative. And I think that that's also positive. I don't know if I have answered anything that you asked, Fernando. Just let me know if this is okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mario. I would like only to to underline what you were saying about register, about inventories and all these kind of things, that we are used to that, but sometimes we are not so much aware about the fact that these are perhaps additional tools of conservation, because sometimes what we have of a certain heritage is the register of that. And this is another way to enjoy, let's say, and to deal with that kind of heritage. We can continue in the same order with Maria Eugenia. What are, Maria Eugenia, your reflections about what we are talking about at the moment?
Yes, thank you, Fernando. And what I'm now thinking about is all the topics are really interesting, but I'm narrowing on the point of what we do in front of a disaster, how to face disasters and pandemics. There is a system to do that, or should be a dynamic for acting. I think most of the experiences that I've heard or I've known about a disaster is acting only after an event has happened. At least we are, as a country, I think we are used to do that. But I think we have to set a turning point and to be aware that the system is needed. From what I know is that the risk awareness and the risk preparedness works very fine at the level of risk management and disciplines, as you mentioned, we need the integration of new disciplines, because, for example, the ones related to nature, we are used to know exactly, for example, measures of land moving on anything related to what is going to happen for a natural change. But probably those things are not so clear when we talk about culture, what we are doing for that, how we are preparing for a change or a disaster or a pandemic that we know now how to expect that in the future. So I think during the sessions during this month, there has been a lot of discussions about how also people through ancestral knowledge, for example, of medicinal plants, they have hardly tried to keep themselves healthy, for example, and to be prepared for this pandemic. So I think in some sense, the interdisciplinary that you were talking about is to bring together knowledge, but in all levels. I mean, not only from academics or what we as concerned people about heritage can provide to the discussion, but I also think the community is a source of knowledge. It's a different one, but it's been proved through time, and it's really valuable, I would say. So I think this system should include not only the preparedness, considering all those risks, but also thinking about the next stages. So preparedness could be the first one, but then we have also if we can say 3 moments, the previous moment would be preparedness. Then we have the moment when it's happening, and we could talk about the pandemic itself. What are the responses during the pandemic? And also we have to think about afterwards. If a disaster happens, what we do after. So in that sense, if I could see in these 3 different moments, what we need or who needs to be prepared, I would say there are a lot of stakeholders involved, and the social conditions that we have before, during, and after could be really different, and we can take advantage actually of how we prepare. And this, I see this system not only as a linear system, but I think we need to do it as a dynamic system. So if we have very good with good practices around the world in front of an earthquake, of any other disaster, we could try to replicate that in the preparedness of another side. You talk about also something really that moved me a lot, and it's about how the pandemics and how this had impact to the tourism, that tourism needs a lot of support from a heritage side. But when we think about the other face of the coin, the pandemic also implied the reduction of CO2 emissions. Because of the pandemic, we couldn't really move too much from one place to another. And this has reduced I would say, the territorial limits of moving from one place to another. This has implied, of course, the reduction of the possibilities to visit other places around the world, but also has made us aware about the heritage is really close by to us. In Europe, for example, there is restrictions even in the kilometers that you can take a flight to. So if it is really few kilometers, you are not you're not able to take a flight. So that makes you aware of what's going on around you, and probably to build up these local communities that we are talking, maybe they are regional communities that we are talking. And of course, this also makes us aware about the need, as already Christina mentioned, the natural heritage and the opportunity to see this also as a source for tourism. Probably we're putting too much into the cultural shoulders, but we are forgetting that we have, of course, the source of nature, but also the responsibility to maintain it in good conditions, and probably and hopefully in better conditions for the coming generations. That is what I could reflect upon what has been said, Fernando. Thank you.
Well, very interesting. Thank you very much, Maria Eugenia. you mentioned the issue of health. I think it's another crucial. Of course, Christina was also mentioning that in connection with open spaces. But sometimes precisely health and, for instance, hygienic conditions are another source to destroy heritage, because we cannot preserve heritage, let things in housing or urban areas, if they don't have proper hygienic and health conditions. So one of the conditions to preserve heritage is to gain those, to make compatible, let's say, hygienic conditions and historic heritage. I think this is a very, very central issue also and in many cases that also emerge. And perhaps Humberto, of course, what can you add to that? And also I'd make you a specific question, because you were involved in some projects after the 2010 earthquake that tells us about not only how to preserve, but also how to transform, how to project heritage after disasters, for instance.
Gracias, Fernando. Voy a responder precisamente tu pregunta sobre el caso chileno y también haciendo algunas relaciones con lo que vimos durante este mes. Uno de los objetivos de esta fundación es crear nuevos puentes entre comunidades, entre puntos del mundo vinculados con el patrimonio, para generar nuevos espacios de debate y enfrentar los problemas de una manera nueva. Y digo esto porque en relación a la exposición al riesgo, como organización hemos hablado mucho sobre la posibilidad o la necesidad de separar o unificar el patrimonio natural con el cultural. Y si vemos si eso es oportuno, si tienen que fundirse o no, esas dimensiones del patrimonio. Y si vemos que la exposición al riesgo, tanto del patrimonio natural y cultural, las comunidades, es como dijo Mike, un problema de integridad, es imposible separar esa condición natural de la cultural, el patrimonio natural del patrimonio cultural y cómo eso convive tanto en oportunidades como en problemas. Y por lo tanto, desde mi punto de vista, creo que es fundamental entender que las soluciones y la resiliencia se fundan en esa fusión entre lo natural y lo cultural. Por otro lado, hay otro puente que hay que construir y que vimos a lo largo de este mes, que es la valoración y la legitimación del conocimiento nuevo, el grupo de Cristina y Mario, Information Technology, que genera nuevo conocimiento con el uso de nuevas tecnologías. Ese conocimiento tiene que legitimarse al mismo tiempo que se legitima el conocimiento ancestral de las comunidades, como decía María Eugenia, sistemas de fondo también para mejorar las condiciones de salud de las personas. Conocimiento ancestral, vimos casos súper interesantes en Nueva Zelanda de construcciones ancestrales, patrimoniales, antiguas, que no eran afectadas por eventos, digamos, climáticos importantes, aluviones y tifones, etcétera, porque se construyeron con sistemas constructivos ancestrales y, por lo tanto, con un conocimiento que las protegía intrínsecamente de esos problemas. Creo que la legitimación hoy día de esas dos maneras, de esos dos tipos de conocimiento es fundamental. Y se han perdido un poco ambas, se ha perdido la relación entre esas dos dimensiones del conocimiento. Y es fundamental que estas dimensiones de conocimiento se transmitan, y eso se transmitan y que sean base de la educación patrimonial, social y cultural. ¿Por qué? Y esto lo vinculo con el caso chileno, cuando después del terremoto del 2010, nosotros quisimos hacer un proyecto para reconstruir un pueblo en la zona central de Chile. nos dimos cuenta que las comunidades que vivían en este pequeño pueblo no querían reconstruir sus casas en tierra, en adobe, porque había un estigma de que el adobe y la construcción en tierra era peligrosa, era el motivo de las muertes, de los derrumbes, cuando en realidad eso se ha demostrado después con trabajo, con nuevo conocimiento, con la experiencia como la del Perú, el trabajo que ha hecho Julio Vargas, ingeniero de allá, que las construcciones en tierra, si bien mantenidas, si bien conservadas, son absolutamente resistentes y resilientes, ¿no? Entonces, es importante rescatar esas dimensiones del conocimiento, el nuevo y el ancestral, y comunicarlo, transmitirlo, educar a la sociedad civil y en eso para poder, en fondo, poder generar una conciencia patrimonial importante.
Well, thank you, Humberto, very much for this idea of building bridges. Probably it's a central idea for the work we need to do, building bridges in the field of knowledge, in the field of technology, in those of community, politics, well, everywhere. So I think this is a fascinating session. We need to begin to close this session. So I would like to offer a last sort of very brief turn to raise a point that I think it was inspiring in some of the session. The question is, does this difficult situation we have faced, the pandemic situation, and also other situations like disasters, offer us new possibilities? Can we have new hopes, let's say, starting from this? So Mike was mentioning that in the very beginning about the London fire, for instance, or other examples. And so I would like to offer you the floor for this, and if you want to add anything to the discussion, of course, you are welcome. So let's speak a bit, let's say, Mike, about possible hopes of these difficult situations.
Well, just to quickly say is that the pandemics of the cholera of the 19th century, in fact, identified, therefore, cholera was through the water wells, and that generated planning, zoning. And in fact, planning was in the Ministry of Health in Britain till the 1930s. And of course, after the First World War, Corbusier with his Plan Voisin actually was there in the pandemic after the First World War. So in fact, there is enormous opportunities taking place, which Humberto says, well, how do people react to it? The Plan Voisin didn't make much sense to the people, even though that it came on that part of it. But it's what, Fernando, you spoke about health. Well, I think that what has now come, if you're asking what is the new knowledge, we now call it well-being. So therefore it is not just simply my physical health, but my mental health, and everything which is around it. And I think that the word well-being, therefore, becomes really important. So I would say, let's take a page out of climate change. They're using the words of adaptation and mitigation. And I think that that could help us to actually understand exactly how can we bring on new ideas and new activities. On one hand, we're adapting, and the other one, we have to deal with the issues of mitigation. I was just looking at one of the things of natural disasters, and I looked at the criteria, and it says contains superlative natural phenomena or outstanding examples representing major stages of Earth history. Well, the volcanoes are now tourist attractions. I mean, the numbers of people flying out to see a catastrophe is in fact something which is part and parcel of our life. So the relationships to the natural heritage and the cultural heritage, the monument and the urban heritage needs to be then unpackaged and then detailed very carefully. So I think that the actual bringing on board of new knowledges is then we need to adapt and we need to mitigate.
Thank you very much, Mike. Christina, please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Fernando. I'd like to start by saying I think that the well-being question actually comes back to what Mario said earlier about planet happiness and this way of measuring differently. And, you know, in, is it Burundi? No, it's not Burundi. I can't remember where it is, where you have the national, instead of economic measures. Bhutan. I knew it started with a B, thank you. It's the measuring the gross happiness product, not the gross domestic product. I think that coming positively out of the pandemic disaster, and particularly pandemic, I think that we've broadened our reach of engagement. And I think there's been an unintended consequence. I don't think actually our World Heritage would be the success that it is if people were moving around the world the way we normally do and rushing out to meetings all the time. I don't think we would have had the sustained attention that we have had over months, really. And indeed, all the people who founded and have built this organization. So I think that part is really quite interesting. And by using virtual technologies, I think we will see, I think this will stay, the presentation of multiple narratives. I don't think that will go away. I think that technology will be part of a sustained approach to interpretation and presentation at World Heritage sites and at other sites that allows for different voices to be heard without doing any physical changes to the sites, which is always expensive and then requires further maintenance. So I think that broader reach issue is an important one. And I think that I do believe that with this refocusing on what is nearby, and also I do think that tourism will not come back the way it has, in spite of the fact that cruise ships are already booking and leaving. I don't think that it will come back in the mass over tourism that it was at one point. And I think that actually opens the door for much more thoughtful understanding of these places, the understanding it's a privilege to be there, and it's much more preparation so that people arrive knowing that this is an important place, understanding some of the underlying history and values of it. I think this will deepen our understanding of World Heritage sites among people who are visiting, and indeed the local communities, obviously. I think the emphasis on the use of public space will not go away. I think this will have a profound impact on, for instance, cities. I think that sidewalks are going to double in size and all sorts of things. I think cities are going to rethink themselves in terms of crowding and so on. And I won't go into the detail there. And I actually, to close, I would just like to make two comments. One on co-creation. And there was quite a long article in the local paper about a researcher in blood who has developed a game in order to engage the brain power of millions of gamers in understanding, if you have this dimension, you have that dimension, what does it mean in terms of how you could, quote, win the game. But for the researcher, it's accessing a lot of brain power and a lot of thinking on different possibilities, the creativity and innovation. And I do believe that the IT revolution, we're only at the beginning of that for heritage. But I do think that gamification is a way forward to tap into the enormous creativity and innovation that is out there and is not at all mobilized. And so that's kind of my own sense of it. But I don't ask me, I'm a Luddite in a way, so I'm not the one to invent it, but I have an instinct that this could be true. And then the last thing is something that actually happened this weekend in Ottawa. And it's a very reassuring example of the power of civil society. And the city is working on road construction. Canada's always working on road construction because of the cold and so on. And the workers came across a big boulder and they were getting ready to dynamite it. Unfortunately, in that little community, there was a specialist in minerals who said, no, this is a glacial erratic boulder that dates 10,000 years old. No, excuse me, I think he said it was, 1 billion years old. I wrote that down because I was so interested. And it weighs between 11 and 15 tons. And the city has engaged not to destroy it and moving it to a park. And everyone in the community is saying, I'm so excited to take my children and explain this stone was here 1 billion years ago. So I think that this is really a wonderful, tiny image of the power of civil society. So bravo. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I'm so amazed and so happy that talking about heritage and disasters brought us to issues like well-being and happiness. And you obviously can remember that happiness of a term like that was the center of Aristotle ethics. And of course, probably speaking about heritage, we are also speaking about ethics in a way, and we should promote a heritage ethics in a way. And so I think it's very, very inspiring. And of course, I rescue the Christina's idea of the privilege of being there. I think that is crucial, because if we are aware of the privilege of being here and being there, we will build up new eyes to understand new places. And this is a completely new way of understanding the world in a way. So we can go on. Excuse me for that. And Mario, do you think we have opportunities starting from this problematic condition that we are facing now?
Well, I think that just by having this webinar today and the ones we had over this month and so on, I think that we have a lot of opportunities that we have created. And I'm sorry, my video is lacking a little bit. So I'm going to switch it off and you're going to see my image, but not.
Okay, no problem.
Yes. So I think that, yes, given we have the opportunity to collaborate with our World Heritage, I think that that it brings a lot of opportunities. And what Christina just said about the participation of the community in protecting their own heritage, I think that that's also increasingly appearing in all parts of the world. Now, we have been following all the conflicts that have been happening lately across the world, and we live in a kind of international community in which we discuss about it and we try to do things common using social media. So, as you know, I am Venezuelan by birth, and our situation has been really bad in our country. And there has been a very mobilized international Venezuelan expatriates community trying to do something through using technology, right? So I think it's the same with what it has impacted us of the pandemic. I am wondering if it wasn't for the pandemic situation and the lockdowns and the necessity to connect via Zoom, would our World Heritage Initiative be so successful in recruiting so many people to talk together about things? So I think that this is a good learning opportunity, that the positive of the pandemic is that we need more opportunities to be more inclusive, and inclusive is given by these technologies, right? Because people can connect and people can discuss about the digital divide and, people not having the best, but basically, using conferencing systems, you can use any type of device to connect, right? A computer or a very sophisticated smartphone, and you can talk. Maybe sometimes we have problems with the connection like I am having now, but we have this opportunity. So I think that we need to capitalize more on this type of technology of exchanging and being more inclusive. And I would like to say that my last comment, well, Fernando, I want to thank you and the team again for all these great events that we had throughout this month.
Oh, thank you very much, Mario. And I think you were mentioning all the virtual links and communications, and I was wondering if we if we were able to turn this virtual communication in something which is virtuous in a way. So something good for everybody. So Maria Eugenia, what about opportunities?
Yes, thank you, Fernando. And I think, as already mentioned, we have this great opportunity to be here together, and doesn't matter really where in the world we are, but we have this chance to integrate our ideas in some way and to interact with each other. So I would say that in these newest scenarios, there is a word that I like and it was already mentioned, and it's innovation. Innovation that brings new answers to the ongoing activities, to new scenarios, because we know that in spite of that, our societies in the past already passed through the pandemics, or other disasters in the past. I think now we are in the time where communication has become a powerful tool to capture narratives, voices from everyone, and from different ages, from different groups of people. So I think in this evolution that also Mike mentioned, we need to adapt, because I think Zoom is here for stay for a longer time, but we will for sure find ways to interact between physical and virtual spaces. I think the opportunity given by new technologies, the access first to new technologies, is for sure a new opportunity that engages also new generations and makes an opportunity to integrate these different generations. Because I'm thinking about an example of that we can recreate a way to communicate kids with their grandparents. We know that kids now are raised with the technology in front of them, and they are born in this system. And so maybe we do not need the new generation to stop doing that, but probably we need them to do this for the old generations, and the new generations will take care of it. Of course, not everything can be done virtually, but I think a lot of things have been facilitated by new technologies. Of course, I think we are in a good place to start innovation, and we are looking already at this in the initiative. We are stepping back and saying, okay, what comes for the next 50 years of the convention, how we want to encounter it. And I think gathering together and thinking about making a change in front of this, it's already a lot of success. So I hope for the coming years, and we have a lot of lessons learned from this month, and there are a lot of months also thematic debates to come. So I think we are giving our best to improve heritage conservation. Thank you, Fernando, and thank you all the organizers.
Thank you very much, Maria Eugenia. And Humberto, I think I am convinced that the thematic debate and the seminar really open opportunities and was a great opportunity, at least for us. So perhaps you can elaborate and summarize a bit about the opportunities open precisely by this seminar. Perhaps we missed Humberto. No,
yeah, okay,
no, it's
okay.
okay.
I was muted. Sorry. Sí, yo creo que first of all, primero somos nosotros aquí, estas 1,800 personas de este mes, somos la prueba de esta nueva oportunidad que nos ha dado la pandemia, esa necesidad de estar conectado, de compartir conocimiento y estar de alguna forma juntos, creando nuevas redes, creando nuevos grupos de trabajo. Creo que esa es como la primera y más concreta demostración de que hay algo nuevo que viene y somos nosotros. como Our World Heritage Foundation, pero también como todas las personas que se han acercado a participar en el seminario y los seminarios también anteriores. Y después voy a plantear estas nuevas oportunidades planteando lo que dijo Mike, el higienismo, digamos, la fiebre española produjo una nueva forma de crear planning, ¿cierto? Pero en ese momento el planning de los años 30 coincide también con la Carta de Atenas del 33, que pone de relieve el patrimonio como un gran tema, ¿no? Entonces hay una manera de New Urbanism and Heritage al mismo tiempo. Creo que esta reclusión, 2 años en casa, nos has hecho sentir la necesidad de poder vivir, disfrutar del patrimonio, de la cultura, de los centros históricos, de la gastronomía, de una manera como probablemente antes, digamos, no habíamos entendido. Entonces me gustaría pensar que para lo que viene, el patrimonio sea la clave para generar nuevos pactos sociales y culturales en los cuales que nos permita superar la visión dicotómica entre global, local, entre conservación y versus transformación, y en el patrimonio como una clave para vivir el presente de manera consciente, valorando el pasado y conservándolo hacia el futuro. Creo que digamos, me gusta pensar que eso es lo que viene y eso estamos tratando de hacer como grupo de personas interesados en el patrimonio. Eso, Fernando, muchas gracias. Y gracias de nuevo a todos aquellos que nos apoyaron. Thank you very much for all that join us during this month. The coordinator, the presenters, the people who joined the session in live and YouTube. Thank you very much. The success of this seminar, it's for you, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Humberto. I wouldn't dare to summarize this fascinating conversation. I think it's impossible, but I only want to say thank you to all of you. Very many thanks to all of you for your availability, for your generosity, and for participating in this closing session. So thank you. I hope it will be, I don't know, remember for the future, I think.
Thank you, Fernando. I would like to only to remember that next month is dedicated to new approaches. It's organized by the Universidad Federal de Rio de Janeiro, by Monica Bahia with the Brazilian group. They have also 20 sessions prepared for us. Please, you can follow the program in our website, and they start on Monday, 7th of June. Thank you again. Thank you very much. I don't know if the people who are here want to activate their camera, and maybe we can.
Mike wanted to say something.
No, just to also, we're looking at the background and the graphics, and I'd like to thank Fernando Perez family for giving us this most amazing graphics, which was so important for projecting our image around.
I will tell them. Okay, I will tell them. Okay.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You. I'll take a photo, please. Say yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.